pleasure to be here on the plenary stage one at the Dubai FinTech Summit. As I've been introduced, my name is Jane Witherspoon. I'm the Bureau Chief for Euronews here in the Middle East. And I'm delighted to be joined by Vanessa Colella, who is the Global Head of Innovation and Digital Partnerships for Visa. Vanessa, can you, before we get started, just give us a little overview of your role and what you do?
Sure. Thank you, Jane, and thank you so much for the invitation. It's great to be here in Dubai. What I do at Visa, I run innovation for the company. I also run our digital partnerships. So think all of the large tech companies around the world through to digital asset companies, the long tail of fintech, anyone who's playing in the payment space, but might not be a traditional bank or traditional merchant. So we cover quite a big waterfront.
Thank you. Can you begin by telling us, why is Dubai regarded as one of the world's top fintech hubs? How is it shaping the future of the sphere and finance and innovation fintech in particular?
So I've been asked so many times today, oh, is it your first time to Dubai? I said, no, I come here all the time. And I do that because I think it's both the spirit of the place, the willingness to build, but also the actions that have been taken over time. So at Visa, we're really proud partners of the DIFC. It's not just sort of in name, it's really, you can look at the progress that's been made here in the region. One thing that stood out for me, last year, many places around the world that I was traveling, I was talking about the decline in funding for fintech, the decline in startups. And here in the UAE, it was up 92% last year. So it gives you a real tangible sense that the building that's happening here, the innovation that's happening here is driving the industry in ways that we think it's really important to be close to.
Do you think the infrastructure and I guess the way that businesses are enabled is also an added bonus for companies starting up here?
Yeah, I think every place has a unique character and different, you just heard from Revolut, right? Different places attract different kinds of entrepreneurs because people are interested in infrastructure, interested in funding, et cetera. What I think is unique here is that there's been over the years an ability for Dubai to attract talent, have the right infrastructure, have the right funding mechanisms, and you really need a multiplicity of ingredients in order to see that success. And I think, as I mentioned just a minute ago, I think you're seeing it play out in terms of the companies that are getting started here.
Technology, this is a conversation I've been having lots on the other stages as well, but it's moving so fast, and in particular the use of AI. How is Visa embracing this?
So first of all, technology always moves fast, and it's going to keep getting faster. And so the image I have in my mind is if you're sort of not using technology yet, you have to just get started. It's sort of like going to the gym. If you went to the gym and you tried to get on a treadmill that was already moving really quickly, you'd get thrown off the back. But if you just get started and kind of moving, you can get your way there. At Visa, we've been, in some ways, we're quite an old fintech. We've been around for 60 years. We've been in the space of AI. We've been investing in AI and machine learning for the past 30 years. It powers a lot of the experience in Visa. If you just think about the size and scale of what we deal with around the world, we process about 83,000 transactions every second. And for every one of those transactions, we're looking at 500-600 different data points. So we've had to embrace technology from the very beginning of our existence. It's really part of our DNA. Having said that, I think the changes that we've all seen over the past not quite 2 years with the advent of GenAI really has caused us to step back as a company and say, wow, that's technology that's not only going to help us in areas of risk and fraud, which clearly already is, but also in how we think about what consumer expectations are and how we think about partnering with our own clients. So it's really broadened the aperture of the types of people both within our company and within our partners and how we think about applying that technology. So we're at the beginning, for sure. There's a lot to come.
Is it fair then to say we're equally talking about not just the challenges, but the opportunities that it's going to present moving forwards?
Yeah, if I think about the challenges, they're, I think, on the top of everyone's mind, right? One, how do you attract the right talent? How do you make sure that you're getting the best talent in the world into your company or into your organization. How do we think about risk and fraud? That's certainly a challenge. The kinds of fraud vectors that we'll see in a world where generative AI is powering so many things will be different than what we have seen in the past, and so being able to deal with that, I think, is really important. There's clear privacy issues, whether you think about as an individual or as a corporation, making sure that the data that you secure, remains private. Those are things that are going to get worked through over time. I think everyone who works in the AI space has a pretty deep appreciation of the importance of that, especially when you think about the financial services space, where soundness and safety of the system is core to what all of us think about. On the opportunity side, I mean, in some ways it feels like the sky's the limit. It feels like we're almost at the beginning, like at the beginning of motion pictures where they just film people talking and then they realize, wow, there's a lot more you can do with that. Because this is technology that has the capability of enhancing so many things in our lives, that whether you work in a legal department or a payments department or a customer service department, or you just can start to think about, well, wow, how could we do this differently? How could it be better? So we're already looking at everything from shopping experiences to loyalty to client service to just back-end productivity. I mean, I think those are all on the table as far as we're concerned.
I was just talking to Ian Johnson from the DFSA earlier on an earlier panel, and when he was regarding looking at the industry, he said, we're at the end of the beginning as opposed to the beginning of the end. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I don't even know if we're at the end of the beginning, but we're definitely nowhere near the end. I think we will all have to challenge ourselves to not only apply AI to the problems that we have today in the paradigm in which we think about those problems today, but really push ourselves to think beyond the way things have been. And so, yes, I would agree. It doesn't feel like the end to me. It feels like very, very early on.
In terms of collaboration and regulation, looking at policymakers, how important is that? You've mentioned AI, but there's the ethics that comes with all of this.
Oh, there's so much important stuff in that question. So first of all, we think at Visa that it's incredibly important to collaborate with governments, with regulators, especially around new technology, right? To share what it is that we're working on, to share the findings that we've had, to share what it is where we see challenges. Because the reality is that you open this panel by saying, things are moving really fast, and that's true for all of us. It's true whether you sit in a government agency or you sit in a corporation. So we think that collaboration is critical. I'll give you some examples just to make it tangible. At Visa, for many years now, we've been working with central banks around the world as they think about digital currency and digital assets, right? What's that going to look like? How should they think about the technology? How do they build sandboxes to sort of explore and see what those use cases are? And what we've found is that everyone's learning together. We're learning, the regulators are learning, and together we're coming up with solutions to things that at the beginning seemed like kind of esoteric problems. We expect that the same thing will happen in the AI space. I think one challenge that we'll have in AI that's quite different than in the digital asset space is that at least with generative AI, right now it's very concentrated in terms of the number of leading companies around the world who are investing massive amounts in this technology. If you just think about the difference between sort of the distributed nature of the internet and the concentrated nature of GenAI, look at the top 6 tech companies last year invested about $236 billion in R&D. So that's almost $40 billion per company. And if you've listened to any of the recent earnings reports, a huge amount of that investment is going towards AI. So as we all think about how does the space evolve, how do we think about the payment space and the financial services space, I think having those close partnerships not only with with regulators and with governments, but also with tech companies. I know there have been a lot of announcements recently here in Dubai with Microsoft and OpenAI and others. I think those close partnerships are really important because this is a very different, the industry has a very different dynamic in AI right now in terms of its concentration than what we've all become accustomed to online over the past couple of decades.
We've talked there about AI and technology and investing in that. Another thing that crops up is clearly sustainability. How do we measure that? How do we invest in that?
Yeah, I mean, for a little while, everyone was trying to measure sustainability until it became kind of like, how do I show my measurements in one way or the other? I think, you know, the great thing about it is that I think there's such widespread agreement now, particularly in the tech industry, but even more broadly, that sustainability is a core goal of everyone's. I think, you know, depending on whether you're in the asset management business, there's certain ways to measure sustainability, but even within all of our own firms, right, at Visa, you know, we have measurements of, you know, what are we doing to contribute to, you know, overall goals that the planet has, and also, how do we think about what it is that we can uniquely contribute as we think about, you know, bringing the underbanked into a more formal economy, making sure that people have opportunity that they might not have had before, making sure that there's liquidity across supply chains. You know, each of those parts is a bit, in my view, a part of how do we as an industry work together to make sure that we're doing good.
What are some of the exciting partnerships and innovative areas that Visa are working in that you've been particularly proud to be involved in?
Oh, I run partnerships. This is like asking me to pick amongst my children.
Your favorite child?
Who's my favorite child? Well, we just talked about supply chain a second ago, so I'll tell you one that might be relevant here for the audience that I'm particularly interested in, and I'll tell you why. So I'm very interested in embedded finance because at any given time, if you look around the world, there's about a $1.7 trillion gap between goods that are moving around the world and liquidity or financing for those goods. And the sort of crazy thing about this is that that burden of that $1.7 trillion gap is borne by the smallest suppliers. Just think about it. If you're a large company, you can kind of dictate when you get paid. But if you're the smallest supplier at the end of the long tail, you're going to get paid when you get paid. And so we think that if we can start to get finance and payments embedded in business, embedded in logistics, embedded in the supply chain, as a world, we will be able to shrink that $1.7 trillion gap, and it will help small businesses grow, it will help individual entrepreneurs grow, it will increase GDP of countries as we're able to do that. So just a really small example of this, but one that we're particularly excited about. This is a Latin American example, but I think it's quite relevant around the world. We're working in Brazil and Argentina with a company called AgriToken to tokenize crops prior to harvest. So for all of time, probably, farmers have sold their crops in advance of harvest when they need funds to invest back in their business. But as you can imagine, you know, the smallest farmer doesn't have very much leverage when they're doing that. So they tend to take a very steep discount, and because of the way this works, they tend to take that discount on the whole crop because you can't prove, oh, I've only sold this piece of it or that piece of it. By tokenizing that asset, we can actually allow farmers to bid out their crop to multiple banks who may want to buy that asset ahead of time. But at the same time, they can fractionalize that asset, which you read about all the time, but then you think, oh, I get it. Like, I'm only going to sell the bit of that crop that I need to get as much liquidity as I need in that moment. To us, this is sort of a real example of tokenization that brings it from a thing that people talk about down to how is it going to change the economy in your market? Who could you empower differently if you were employing this technology? And I think about that and I think, well, gee, it's not just crops, right? How do we think about all the many alternative assets that people have access to, but they cannot get lending against. It's just too complicated. It's not worth it for the banks to try and sort of assess that asset and make sure it's not going anywhere. So for us, this is just the beginning of how we think about tokenizing not only bank deposits, but how we think about tokenization on the asset side as well. But we're excited about it because it's never just the technology. I think we often get so wrapped up about the technology. It's really about the technology, the infrastructure, as you asked earlier, and then how people behave and whether those applications, those technological applications, can change how people behave. And those three pieces together, I think we're starting to see in ways that we've frankly only been talking about for the past decade. We're starting to see that really come to fruition.
What do you think will be the kind of biggest disruptor in the immediate future for the sector?
Oh.
You on the spot now. I'm so sorry. I
No, that's great. I think, well, I'll tell you a thing that I think about when I wake up in the middle of the night, and as often as I come to Dubai, since I'm always wildly jet lagged, the middle of the night is a good time for me in Dubai. A thing that I think about a lot is digital identity. I think about that because we've all been operating since the mid-90s on the internet. The internet was designed not to identify you. Remember, there used to be that joke, on the internet, no one knows you're a dog. And then it turns out that wasn't useful for a lot of things that people wanted to use the internet for. So there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different identity solutions online, right? Every bank thinks about it. There are specific identity companies, tech companies think about this. It's an incredibly fragmented space because everyone's kind of thinking about identity for their application, for the one thing that they're trying to get done. Identity, for most of time, has been kind of governments, often financial institutions who are really pillars of the community, who are thinking about how do we make sure that I know you're you and we can have a trusted relationship even though we've only recently met. So this is one I think about a lot. It probably doesn't qualify as what is the most immediate disruptor because this is taking time, but if you're not paying attention behind the scenes to all of the various players who are focused on digital identity, I think it's an opportunity for you to add something to your reading list because I think it will fundamentally change the dynamics of the financial services industry and something that it behooves all of us to pay close attention to.
What's the best bit of advice you've ever been given when it comes to your career and outlook?
Well, I have a poster in my office. We'll see if this translates, I'm not sure. It says, "It can't be done. It's never been done. I told Orville that, I told Wilbur that, and I'm telling you that." Orville and Wilbur were the Wright brothers, the first people who flew an airplane. So I love that advice, and frankly, I think it's so fitting for Dubai because every time I come here, I feel like, wow, this is a place where somebody says you can't do that, and somebody says, oh, yes, I can. I just did it right over there. I was out to dinner when I was here last with a friend of mine who hadn't been to that place in a little while, and he's like, oh my gosh, there's a whole new island right there. So I think that notion, that enthusiasm and kind of contagious energy around, don't let people tell you that it can't be done, just figure out how to do it.
Vanessa, it's a pleasure to have you here in Dubai. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together. Thank you.
Thank you so much.